The wind rolled like a whispering ghost across the red plains of Arizona, carrying the dust of old battles and the scent of rain that never quite came. The sun was a cruel overseer, burning the land raw, painting the horizon in colors that hurt to look at: amber, rust, blood, and fire. Somewhere between those endless dunes and skeletal canyons, a woman rode alone. Her name was Clara Hensley, though she hadn't spoken it aloud in months. Life had scoured her down to silence. Her husband had died 2 winters ago in a storm that chewed their cabin to splinters, and the child she'd carried never drew breath. Now she wandered the land with her mule, a rifle, and a heart half turned to stone, searching for something she couldn't name. Maybe peace, maybe punishment, maybe a reason not to lie down and never wake again. It was on one of those wandering days, when the heat shimmered like a mirage and the world felt ready to collapse into dust, that she found the cave. It wasn't much to see from a distance, just a dark mouth cut into a wall of sandstone, hidden behind a curtain of scrub. But the mule balked and brayed, ears flicking, nostrils flaring, and Clara's gut twisted with that strange sense the lonely get when something unseen stirs near them. She dismounted, rifle raised, and stepped into the shade. The air inside was cooler, thick with the smell of damp stone and something metallic, blood, maybe. She moved slow, one hand brushing the cave wall for balance, until her eyes adjusted to the dim. Then she saw him. At first, she thought it was a corpse. A man lay crumpled against the far wall, bound by rawhide straps at the wrists and ankles, chest bare and streaked with dirt and blood. His hair was black as crow feathers, tangled and matted, and his skin, though dulled by grime, carried the copper hue of the Apache. Clara's heart stopped. She'd heard the stories: raids, ambushes, soldiers gone missing. But this was different. Whoever he was, he'd been left here to die, tied up like an animal. His breathing was shallow, a weak flutter of ribs that seemed to fight the air itself. Clara hesitated only a moment before she slung her rifle, pulled her knife from her boot, and crouched beside him. "Hey," she whispered, voice cracking from disuse. "Can you hear me?" No response. His lips were cracked, blackened, and his face was blistered from sun and fever. She saw the rawhide cutting into his wrists, and something inside her broke. She cut the bindings one by one, working carefully, speaking to him in a low murmur as though her voice alone could keep him alive. "Don't you die on me now, stranger. Whoever did this to you ain't got the right." When the last strap fell away, his hands dropped limp at his sides, and for a moment Clara thought she was too late. Then his chest jerked, a rasp of air tore from his throat, and his eyes, dark, burning eyes, snapped open. He looked at her with something between terror and fury, a wild animal's gaze, and his hand shot up to her throat before falling weakly again. She didn't flinch. "Easy," she said, pressing his shoulder back. "You're safe. No one's gonna hurt you here." She fetched her canteen, tipped it gently to his lips. He drank like a man drowning, coughing, sputtering, then drinking again until she pulled it away. She stayed with him for hours, dabbing his brow, cleaning his wounds with a torn strip of her skirt, speaking in quiet tones though he likely didn't understand her words. She could tell he was Apache by the beaded amulet around his neck, the faded paint on his chest, the scars that marked him as a warrior. She didn't know his name, and he didn't speak hers. When night fell, she built a small fire near the cave's mouth and sat guard, listening to his breathing even out. The desert outside was a living thing, whispering through the brush, coyotes crying somewhere far away, the stars sharp as shards of ice above them. For the first time in months, Clara felt the weight of silence ease, not vanish, but soften, as though the universe had stopped to listen. By morning, the man's fever had broken. When he woke, he stared at her like one waking from a bad dream, uncertain if she was real. Clara smiled faintly. "You're alive," she said. "Don't make me regret saving you." He didn't answer, but his eyes held something new, caution, yes, but also curiosity. Over the next days, she nursed him back from the edge. He couldn't stand at first, his body too weak, so she fetched water, hunted small game, and made camp near the cave. She spoke as she worked, telling him little things, the weather, the mule's stubbornness, the way the sunsets painted the sky. He never spoke, only watched her with those deep, unreadable eyes. Once, she caught him trying to sit up, clutching his chest where a deep scar curved over his ribs. "Lie still," she told him, kneeling beside him. "You'll tear your stitches." His gaze flicked to the bandages she'd wrapped there. He touched them, then looked at her again, confused but not ungrateful. It was on the 5th day that he finally spoke. His voice was rough, barely a whisper. "Why?" Clara turned, startled. "Why? What? Why you help me?" he asked, the words slow, accented, but clear. She met his eyes. "Because no one else would," she said simply. He seemed to weigh that answer, then nodded once, as if filing it away. From that moment, something shifted between them. He began to eat more, to move about the camp. She saw strength returning to his limbs, though he was still haunted by pain. When she asked his name, he said something she couldn't pronounce, short, sharp, like the crack of a whip. "I'll call you Hawk," she said after a moment. "You've got eyes like one." He didn't protest. In return, he asked for her name. "Clara," she said softly, surprised by how strange it felt to hear her own name spoken aloud again when he repeated it, "Clara." The way he said it, carefully, as though it was something sacred, stirred something in her chest she thought long dead. As the days turned to weeks, they stayed near the cave, building a rhythm. She hunted rabbits and quail. He crafted arrows from mesquite branches and showed her how to read the wind. They shared meals in silence, sometimes laughter in the rare moments it came, and slowly the cave stopped feeling like a tomb. Once, when she burned her hand tending the fire, he took her wrist gently, dipped it in cool water, and said, "Fire bites those who forget to respect it." She smiled. "Then fire and I have much in common." He tilted his head at that, puzzled but amused. But peace, Clara knew, was a fragile thing in that land. One afternoon, while she was out fetching water, she heard the distant echo of hooves, men riding hard. She ducked low, peering over a ridge, and her blood ran cold. Soldiers, blue coats, rifles slung. They were searching the canyons, likely for escaped Apache prisoners. Clara hurried back to the cave, breath ragged. "We have to go," she said, grabbing her things. Hawk looked at her, eyes narrowing. "Soldiers." She nodded. He stood, still limping but strong enough to walk. Together they packed what little they had and slipped into the Badlands. The chase that followed was a blur of dust and sweat, of fear thrumming through their veins. They hid by day and traveled by night, following the stars. During one of those nights, under a silver moon, Clara finally asked, "What did they do to you? Why were you tied up?" Hawk was silent for a long while, the wind carrying only the sound of crickets. "Betrayal," he said at last. "My own people. They think I helped the whites, but I only tried to save children. The soldiers, they killed them anyway." His jaw clenched, and Clara saw the pain behind his calm. She didn't speak, she just reached out and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. In that moment, something passed between them, something wordless and fragile, like the heartbeat of a wild thing that's learned to trust. As dawn crept over the plains, Clara realized she was no longer running just from grief. She was running towards something, someone. Hawk was no longer just a man she'd saved. He was the one who'd saved her from the silence that had nearly swallowed her whole. The days that followed their escape felt like borrowed time, as though the desert itself had agreed to hide them for a while. They built a small camp near a river where the mesquite trees bowed low and the air smelled of wet stone. Clara learned to fish with her hands. Hawk taught her to move silently, to listen to the ground before stepping, to see meaning in every broken twig. She began to smile again, rare, unguarded smiles that softened the edges of her grief. Hawk watched her sometimes as if he couldn't believe she existed, this pale woman who carried both sorrow and fire in her eyes. They spoke little, but the quiet between them grew warm, not heavy. At night he told her stories in his broken English, of spirits who lived in the thunder, of warriors who became stars. She told him of her husband and the child who never came, and he listened without judgment, his gaze steady as the moon. One evening, as the sun died red over the hills, she said softly, "I think you were sent to remind me that the world still holds life." Hawk shook his head. "No, you remind me world still holds mercy." The words hung between them like a fragile promise. But the world has no patience for peace in the borderlands. One morning Hawk spotted smoke on the horizon, campfire smoke that did not belong to them. His face hardened. "Soldiers," he said. Clara's heart lurched. They had ridden far. Surely no one would find them now. Yet the past has a way of riding faster than hope. They packed quickly, but before they could reach the canyon's edge, the first rifle cracked. The mule screamed and fell. Clara dropped to the ground as bullets tore through the scrub. Hawk dragged her behind a rock, returning fire with his bow. His movements were fierce and precise, but there were too many of them. Dust and gunpowder filled the air. The smell of death came close. "Go," he shouted. "Run to river." She shook her head, refusing. "I'm not leaving you." A bullet grazed his shoulder. He grimaced, eyes blazing. "Clara, if you stay, you die." Still she didn't move, so he caught her face in his hands, kissed her once, quick, desperate, like a man saying both goodbye and thank you, and then pushed her away. "Go," he said again, softer. She ran. The sound of battle followed her through the ravine. The whine of bullets, the shouts of men, the single cry that cut her soul in two. When silence finally came, she turned back, stumbling through the dust and blood. She found him by the riverbank, one hand pressed to his chest, the other still clutching the amulet that had once hung around his neck. His eyes were half open, reflecting the sky. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands over his wound as if sheer will could stop the life pouring out. "No, no, not like this," she whispered. Hawk's lips moved. She bent close. "Clara," he said, the name now soft as breath. "Do not cry. Water carries me home." Then the strength went out of him, and his head fell against her shoulder. For a long time she held him there, the river murmuring at their feet, the wind carrying the last smoke away. When the soldiers arrived hours later, they found only the body of a native warrior and a woman sitting beside him, her face streaked with dust and tears, refusing to move. One of them asked who he was. She looked up, eyes hollow but proud. "His name was Hawk," she said. "He was my home." They buried him beneath the mesquite where the water curved, and Clara placed his amulet on the grave. After the soldiers rode off, she stayed, because leaving felt like betrayal. Seasons turned. The river rose and fell. Sometimes travelers saw a lone woman tending a small fire by the water, whispering to the wind as if it answered her. They said she'd gone mad, loving an Apache. But those who looked closer saw peace on her face, the kind that comes only when love has burned through pain and turned to something eternal. Years later, when the desert took her too, the wind carried dust from both graves together, mingling them so no one could tell where one ended and the other began. And still, when storms roll across the plains, some say you can hear a woman's voice in the thunder calling a name that echoes back in the rain, Hawk. So if this story touched your heart, if you felt the wind and the fire and the river that carried them both, remember to subscribe, because stories like this keep their spirits alive, one listener at a time.